Good evening, and welcome to the Judicial Forum presented by the Lower Merion Narberth Dems under the capable leadership of Jeff Scott and the Issue and Policy Subcommittee under the equally able leadership of Adrian Seltzer. I'm Murray Levin, and I'm proud and pleased to be your host tonight. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and believe me, you're in for an interesting evening. What we want to do is show you our outstanding candidates for each of the major appellate court positions. And we want to get your excitement to the level that you and we feel so that you can get out there, get everyone registered, and let's make this turnout something that'll be one for the books. I will introduce each of our judicial candidates after we have two special guests. They're going to be here very briefly, and we'll get to our main event shortly. First of all, I'd like to call on Neil Makija, who many of you will know as a really outstanding candidate for Montgomery County Commissioner. And as an added bonus, Neil just happens to be a professor of constitutional law. Aren't we all? And so I've asked Neil if he would be kind enough to go through the three levels of appellate courts and tell us a little bit about their specific jurisdiction and why they matter so much to all voters. Neil?
Sure. Thank you so much. And you give me a bit of an upgrade. I teach election law. Some of it is constitutional, some of it is not. But sounds nicer when you say constitutional law, professor. But nice to see everybody. It's really great to be on the home turf. You always have a fantastic turnout with DCLMN. So thank you all. Nancy, Sarah, Murray, everyone who helped put this together at DCLMN, Adrian, of course. So let me just go through this very quickly. And I'm sure you're going to also hear some of it in much better specificity from the candidates who are currently on the bench. But we have a really important opportunity this year to elect people who reflect our values on a number of fronts and who are going to be enforcing and really defining our constitutional rights and what our Constitution in Pennsylvania means, and whether we give life to provisions that were fought for a long time ago. And as you know from what's happening at the U.S. Supreme Court, whether or not certain rights that we thought we fought for are really going to stay with us. So let me just go over the structure of the courts briefly in the state. So we have a number of courts that serve as the first trial court where where lawsuits are filed that you may be aware of, that are basically, they call them the minor courts, but the municipal courts, which serve as like the court of small claims, essentially, as well as the magistrate judges that deal with bail hearings, etc. But today we're talking about the appellate courts, which come primarily. There's two intermediate appellate courts that we're going to talk about, which is the Superior Court and the Commonwealth Court. The Superior Court consists of 15 judges, and they primarily take the appeals from the Court of Common Pleas, which is the main trial court when you think of trial and where major cases are initially filed. There's 466 judges on that level of court, the Court of Common Pleas, and then there are only 15 judges on the Superior Court. So the Superior Court is actually where most cases get resolved finally. There are about 3,000 petitions that go to appeal to the state Supreme Court from the Superior Court. The vast majority of those are not even considered. So there are judges that sit in panels of 3 on the Superior Court that consider appeals from the Court of Common Pleas. One of those judges, of course, Dan McCaffrey, who's on that court and hopefully will be elevated to justice. But this is where most cases that you don't hear about, or also not in the headlines, will ultimately see their final disposition. The Commonwealth Court is a court where most of the cases deal with the state and the Commonwealth itself. So when the state is being sued, that's where the cases first go. On election law matters, on the ones that we handle, they'll go straight to the Commonwealth Court as a trial court as opposed to as an appellate court. And so that's a really critical court on a number of cases that deal with the state. So a number of issues that you might remember, Ellen Seisler had a decision last year on whether a ballot referendum regarding Marcy's law was constitutional. There are issues that reflect issues that implicate the Commonwealth go through that court, and that court has only 9 judges. There are 5 Republicans on the Commonwealth Court and 3 Democrats, and we have an opportunity to elect another Democrat in Matt Wolf this year. So the Supreme Court is really where I want to focus, and what I think is important for me to emphasize, because a lot of what we ran on and talked about in the county commissioner's race depends on the outcome of this year's Supreme Court election. So we have a split right now. There are 4 Democrats and only 2 Republicans, but there are many issues that don't divide straight on party lines. For example, on election law, I've talked about this recently at a event in Lower Merion, but we had a decision last year, 3-3, on the issue of undated ballots on elections. So on that issue, there were about 8,000 ballots in Philly that were undated. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania actually decided for that election to allow them, but not to allow them in the future. And the Third Circuit actually, the federal courts decided that wouldn't stand because a technicality, like if you write your birth date or the wrong date on your ballot, should not deprive you of your fundamental right, both under the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, and under your fundamental right to vote. So that got vacated by the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court vacated the Third Circuit's decision, said that they didn't interpret the Pennsylvania Constitution accurately there. And so that issue will come back up to the courts. So that's important because you might vote for someone at the county level who wants to protect your voting rights, like myself, like Jamila Winder. But if we decide that we're going to count those votes, we will get sued by Republicans and they will go to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Ultimately, the court will decide whether or not that technicality is at odds with our constitutional right, for example, to free and equal elections and our right to vote. So this is a really critical thing to recognize for this year's elections, because it could lead literally to tens of thousands of ballots being counted or not counted in 2024 for this presidential election. And whether we elect really great people at the local level may not make a difference if we don't have a court that's going to enforce the rights that we have and that we fought for. And that's just one issue, of course. In our Pennsylvania Constitution, there is a right that you may know and recognize, or an obligation, really, that the General Assembly has to provide and support for a thorough and efficient system of public education. That was in question this year in a constitutional decision, which actually mandated that the legislature find a way to live up to their constitutional obligation. There's an amendment of our Constitution there's only 4 in the country on environmental rights that would be defined and enunciated by the Supreme Court. It was last really invoked in a significant way after Tom Corbett was governor. He passed a law to force municipalities to accept fracking, to basically preempt zoning over fracking. And the PA Supreme Court at that time, in a decision, Robinson Township is the name of the township that filed the case, decided that that was at odds with the Pennsylvania Constitution and the Environmental Rights Amendment. And so it actually allowed municipalities then to ban fracking if they chose to and to enact regulations. So issues like that really get decided at the Supreme Court, whether or not our constitutional rights really have meaning, and whether we can, add that meaning to the words that we fought for, whether it was for equal elections, whether it was for the environment, whether it was for education at the times these were written. And so what we do in this election is going to be really critical on all of those issues and many more. So go ahead, Murray.
Thank you, Neil. Our next speaker is a man I've known and admired for a very long time. He has been a state representative from the 149th District, and I've asked him to wear his hat tonight as the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. What we need to appreciate is how important these judicial races are to all of us and to our liberties. Tim Briggs.
Thank you, Murray, and thank you, DCLM. I know we were here to listen to the candidates, so I'll do my best to keep this brief. As the majority chair of Judiciary, just in a few months, we've tackled issues that are important to all of us: LGBTQ protections, hate crime modernization. We did a package of gun safety bills. We created an indigent defense fund. So many more bills that we have done in the committee and in the majority. And what I wanted to mention is that would have been impossible if it wasn't for the 2015 Supreme Court election, when we all worked so hard to make sure that the 3 Democratic candidates won. And what they did after that was address redistricting, congressional level. They were a great partner in the legislative reapportionment plan to come up with fair districts. I would have rather them been partisan Democratic districts, but we created fair districts, which allowed Democrats and all of you to help us get to the majority. So what we have to remember is that short period of time after 2015, when the justices stood up for democracy, stood up for the redistricting, stood with Governor Wolf. What the House Republican majority started doing was file articles of impeachment against those justices, introduce legislation to change the Constitution to create gerrymandered judicial districts statewide, created term limits. They did everything they could to challenge the independent judiciary. So whatever we do, I think all those judicial races are so important that we're going to hear from. But Dan, in the Supreme Court, we have to protect him and make sure he is successful. There is millions and millions of dollars being spent for that one reason, to start chipping away at that independent judiciary to allow MAGA right Republicans dictate the agenda that Neil talked about, that has been threaded. So the legislature, the House, and this, partners in the Senate, not a majority yet, will continue to advance really good progressive legislation. But it will all be not if we go backwards on these judicial elections. It is critically important that we all do what we can to get as high of a turnout we can in Lower Marion, Montgomery County, to deliver a big margin to help our friends be successful in these races. I did want to be quick, Murray, so I'm going to put it back to you, but I'm going to stay on till the end and hear if anyone wants to hear some color. But we can't go backwards. They're going to do everything they can this election, 2 years from now, to try to turn back the clock and make it so redistricting goes back to the way it's been for a long time. So thank you all for joining us, and Murray, back to you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for that message. Turnout, turnout, turnout. And as I said at the outset, we have a fantastic slate here, one that we can be very proud of. Let me just introduce each of the 4 appellate candidates, and then I'm going to ask them each to give us an opening statement. For the Supreme Court, we have Dan McCaffrey, currently a member of the Superior Court. For the Superior Court, we have 2 outstanding women, Tamika Lane, presently serving as a common pleas judge, and Jill Beck, a well-known attorney, literally with a statewide reputation. We're honored to have her. And for Commonwealth Court, the supervising judge, I believe, of the municipal court in Philadelphia, Judge Matt Wolf. Let's start with Dan McCaffrey giving us a 2-minute opening statement. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Dan. Let us see you. And by the way, our candidates are coming from all over the state, and we want to thank them for making time to be with us. And so I give you Dan McCaffrey.
Well, thank you, Murray. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Coming in loud and clear.
Good. I apologize, first of all, that I'm in my car right now. As you mentioned, it's coming out of my 4th event today. I've got one more stop tonight, but by way of introduction, I'm Judge Dan McCaffrey in the Pennsylvania Superior Court, and I have to tell everybody, I absolutely can't stand coming and speaking in Montgomery County. The reason being, I just heard Neil and I just heard Tim Briggs literally steal every one of my talking points. They did an excellent job of kind of talking about the importance of these particular races. They did an outstanding job of literally articulating the stakes that are at risk under these particular circumstances. I am Judge Dan McCaffrey, and I was elected to the Pennsylvania Superior Court in 2019. Since I've been elected to the Pennsylvania Superior Court, I've written over 600 or 700 opinions. I've participated in several thousand opinions. I've been appointed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to serve on the Court of Judicial Discipline, which means I'm one of the 9 judges responsible across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to handle disciplinary matters brought against other judges in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm also the supervising judge right now on the Superior Court of all wiretaps, which means I supervise all law enforcement wiretap applications across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to ensure compliance with applicable criminal law regarding intercepts. Prior to my election to the Superior Court, I was elected to the Court of Common Pleas of Philadelphia County in 2013. And before that, I practiced law in good old Montgomery County in Elkins Park and Jenkintown, Pennsylvania, with a law firm of Friedman Schumann from 1997 to about 2013, which was my election to the Court of Common Pleas. Prior to that, I was an assistant district attorney in the city of Philadelphia from 1991 through 1997. I have been highly recommended by the Philadelphia Bar when I ran for the Court of Common Pleas. I was highly recommended by the Pennsylvania Bar in 2019 for the Superior Court, and I'm once again proud to be highly recommended by the Pennsylvania for the Supreme Court by the Bar Association. I will get to the reasons I'm running shortly, but needless to say, I think everybody needs to really focus on what Tim and Neil just mentioned. The reason I'm running for this court is nothing short than to save American democracy. We saved American democracy in 2015 when we elected those 3 justices to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the same 3 justices that struck down the unconstitutional gerrymandered districts. And within one election cycle, we elected 9 separate Democrats into the House of Representatives, including the Fab Four in southeastern Pennsylvania of Chrissy Houlihan, Susan Wild, Madeline Dean, and Mary Gay Scanlon. It was that Supreme Court that upheld the districts, which now resulted in Joanna McClinton being the first Democratic woman to be the House Speaker of the House in Pennsylvania. And also, if that wasn't enough, ladies and gentlemen, it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that struck down a decision to invalidate almost 100,000 ballots in a lawsuit brought by President Trump to overturn the 2020 election. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what is at stake in this particular election. We're not just limiting this election to women's reproductive rights. We're talking about voting rights. We're talking about LGBTQ rights. We are talking about civil rights, criminal justice reforms, all of the issues that Tim just talked about. That's what democratic justices do. And if you can leave this conversation with one thing, one slogan, it is please understand, majorities matter on our courts. We need to retain a majority on the Supreme Court. We need to take a majority on the Superior Court. And we also need to get the majority in the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much.
You're muted, Murray.
Thank you, Dan. That is certainly one name we want to take away with. There are 4 names we are leaving here tonight on the tip of our tongue. We're going to be telling our friends and neighbors. We're going to have an appreciation for how important all of this is. Let me now move to the second name that we need to have on the tip of our tongue. I think you can see Jill Beck is on the screen. She's an outstanding lawyer with a statewide reputation, and we're going to ask her to talk a little bit in an opening statement of why she's running for the Superior Court and what she brings to that office. Jill.
Thank you very much, Murray, and thank you to the group for having me. Adrian, thank you for helping to plan this. Great to be with you. My name is Jill Beck. I am from Allegheny County, and I am running for the Pennsylvania Superior Court. The Superior Court is a court of individual rights. It hears criminal, civil, family, juvenile, and orphans court matters. Those are all areas where I've practiced as a lawyer. Those are all areas where I have worked on appeals. I have tried and defended and orally argued appeals in the Superior Court as well as appellate courts across the country. And I spent 10 years clerking on the courts, 6 on the Superior Court, 4 on the Supreme Court, where I drafted over 500 of these very decisions. So I know the law, I know the court, I'm passionate about the work it does, and I'm also passionate about the people who come before the court, having largely dedicated my career to helping vulnerable and underserved members of our population. I started my legal career nearly 20 years ago representing abuse and neglect victims, children in Allegheny County. After my clerkship, I joined the law firm Blank Rome, where in addition to my complex commercial litigation and appellate practice, I chaired the Pittsburgh office pro bono department. That allowed me to do work representing victims of domestic violence, victims of racial discrimination, illegal gun sales, and wage theft, members of our LGBTQ community, veterans. I worked to help secure our elections and protect voting rights, worked to help people facing housing insecurity, and just generally help people without money get the same rights and protections as people with means. I have been highly recommended by the Pennsylvania Bar Association to be a Superior Court judge. We need reasoned, solid people to decide these cases, because what we are looking at here is a court that is, as Neil said, the court of last resort for about 98% of cases that come before it. It is also the busiest intermediate appellate court in the country, deciding approximately 6,500 decisions a year. To give you an idea, our Supreme Court, which Dan just spoke about, decides only about 150 cases a year. So when we're talking about somebody's right to be free from incarceration, their right to parent their children, their right to their health, their wealth, their safety, their home, their inheritance, the Superior Court is going to be the court that decides these issues and is the last court to decide these issues. So I'm looking forward to the forum. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Jill. So those are 2 names to keep in mind: Dan McCaffrey, Jill Beck, and here's the third that I want you to have on the tip of your tongue. We're very fortunate to have, well, I thought we would have Tamika Lane, but let's move to Judge Matt Wolf. Certainly.
I'm here, Murray.
Okay.
Murray, I'm here.
All right.
I don't know what name I'm under, but I'm here.
Okay. Can the technical people get Tamika Lane up on the screen?
Tamika, can you talk so I can find the mic
Yes,
that you're
yes,
talking
yes.
from?
That would be helpful, right? I'm just staring at the screen, trying to put lights on in the car. Can you hear me all right? Am I off of mute?
We can hear you. Maybe what we should do is go to Matt Wolf to make his opening statement, then we'll come back to you so you can get the technical issues out of the way.
Sure,
Yeah.
and then I'll just say hi in the chat, and that way you can see whatever name I'm under.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So,
Oh, the chat is turned off, so I can't.
I
So
will turn it on just for you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
so let's see Matt Wolf again up on the screen, our candidate for the Commonwealth Court, a fabulous candidate, and another name I want on the tip of your tongue. Matt, give us a little bit in the way of an opening statement. Tell us about yourself, what you're going to bring to the bench there.
Sure, thank you. I am a judge on the Philadelphia Municipal Court. I supervise the civil division of the municipal court. I'm proud of the eviction diversion program, for which I was the architect during the pandemic, which brought $300 million of federal funds into the hands of landlords and tenants. And so I have a tremendous amount of experience as a judge, trying hundreds of cases in criminal court and probably thousands of cases in the civil division of the Philadelphia Municipal Court. We frequently have several trials a day in that court. I spent 25 years as a civil rights trial attorney. I tried cases. Most of my clients were women. I pursued sexual harassment claims, quid pro quo, hostile work environment, pregnancy discrimination claims, in addition to other claims for wrongful termination, whistleblower, and general employment law. I always represented the employees. I rarely represented management, if I don't even remember a time that I did. So I was very much aligned with the employees. So 25 years of experience as a civil rights trial attorney and 5 years and 9 months as a judge. I also spent 17 years in the Judge Advocate General Corps. Speaking of rule of law, I was a rule of law advisor in Afghanistan. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, I was a rule of law advisor assigned to the team that tried to help the Afghan government deal with 67,000 Afghan National Police that only had one lawyer. So we advised the lawyer as well as the chief of the Afghan National Police. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm happy to talk about other things as we go on.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Tamika, have we worked out the technical issues? We want to see you.
I hope so. I think maybe.
There you are. Welcome to the Judicial Forum, and thanks for being with us. I know that all of you are in different parts of the state, and it looks like you may be in an automobile.
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you will bring to your role on the Superior Court.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for putting this together. As you know, we're all out here crisscrossing this Commonwealth, talking about why the courts matter. And I just talked to a couple younger people, and they was like, "Oh, it's boring. No one's paying attention." I'm like, "Oh no!" And I had to explain why the courts are so important. So thank you for even starting this off, talking about the importance of the courts and the different functions of each level of the courts here in Pennsylvania. So my name is Tamika Lane. As you stated, I am currently a judge in Philadelphia. I was elected to the Court of Common Pleas in 2013 with Judge Dan McCaffrey. We ran together. And it's been an eventful 10 years on the bench. Immediately when Dan and I were elected, we were actually thrown in the East Division, which some of you may know from Dr. Oz's commercials. That's what we were dealing with. I was the presiding judge for human trafficking cases, and I also did a lot of sexual assault cases, especially toward minors, rapes, you name it, attempted murders, burglaries. I did jury and bench trials where I made the decision in bench trials. Before that, many of you know, I was a public school teacher. I taught 7th grade social studies. I was a public defender. I worked doing civil arbitrations. I also was chief counsel for State Senator Anthony Williams, and I was the executive director for the Senate State Government Committee. And that's when the photo ID law came out, as well as other controversial legislation. I have been appointed by Governor Wolf to the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. I was also appointed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to be co-chair for the Pennsylvania Adult County and Parole Commission. And I'm just so honored to be here to talk about that. I was also highly recommended by the Bar Association for this position. I see the signs up, and I'm just so glad to answer questions as they come. I just may move to a little safer area while someone else talks though, but thank you.
Okay, I hope I'm up in the screen again. I don't see myself, but I do hear myself. Hello. So those are the 4 names that you have to take away with you. 4 outstanding candidates for all of the appellate seats that are up. We have Dan McCaffrey, we have Jill Beck, Tamika Lane, and Matt Wolf. So let's get to a question or two here. I think Tim Briggs.
Hey, Murray, it's Tim Briggs.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing that I don't know if the candidates really can highlight? It is an amazing accomplishment for them to be receiving highly qualified and qualified recommendations from the Pennsylvania Bar Association, which is really not a liberal ally of ours, but it really shows their experience and their skill to get those recommendations, and to compare it to the Republican candidates that they're running, folks that got no recommendations. So not all of them, but some of them. So just to add a little bit of not just the Democratic view of me, but the Pennsylvania Bar Association thinks these 4 candidates are top notch. So thanks for letting me interrupt, Murray.
Sure. Good point, Tim. And you made another good point earlier when you were talking about the democratic values that we are interested in, whether it's voting rights, reproductive rights, gun safety, environment, democracy itself. And I'd like to ask each of the candidates, and we are limited in time, so I'm going to ask you to try to keep your answer to roughly 2 minutes. What in your background shows your commitment to these democratic values? And when you're on the bench, and how will you be able to help realize them? So let's start off, first of all, with Jill. We'll go in reverse order. Jill Beck.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned in my opening, I have done work in really all of these areas, trying to help vulnerable and underserved members of our population. I worked on transgender name changes for members of our LGBTQ community, did that pro bono. I also did some work with the Brady Center for Gun Violence to try to quell illegal gun sales. One of the cases I worked on was a fallen officer who was shot by a fleeing felon in Chicago. I represented his estate and his widow in that matter. I also represented the estate of a woman who was shot by her estranged, abusive husband the day after he got out of prison. Both of these individuals have been able to purchase firearms online using assumed names and get away with it. And so those are the sort of things that I sort of bring to the table with my past experience. On the bench, we do deal with all of these individual rights. Right, abortion access would be easily, absolutely decided by the Superior Court. Gun laws, questions about gun sales and the legality of these laws would be coming before the Superior Court. LGBTQ rights would come before this court. These are things that we deal with on a day in and day out basis. And, certainly I'll apply the law as written, and I'll apply it fairly and equally to everyone. And I would put in the time, effort, and energy needed to make sure that these decisions are decided correctly.
Thank you, Jill. Let's take Tamika, and then Matt, and then Dan in that order. Tamika?
Well, thank you. I think it's just very easy to look at my life. My life has been dedicated to service and making sure, oh crap, what was that? I may have to move soon. So my life has been dedicated to the community, from being a child advocate representing abused and neglected children. I was a public defender representing people who could not afford to hire an attorney. These were adults and juveniles, and I was a major trials attorney there, doing jury trials and bench trials. I go out, the Philadelphia Bar Association appointed me co-chair of the ACE program, Advancing Civics Education, where we go into schools and teach civics, because it's so important that our kids know how our system of government works, and why the courts are so important, and why their voice is so important, and how to channel the change that they want to see. My courtroom is a place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. I really take pride in that, because I can walk down the street and I run into so many people who said that they received a fair trial. And sometimes for the first time, they actually felt that they were seen. And that is so important to me, because so many people come from marginalized communities and don't feel like they've been seen in court and their voice is not heard. So I really take pride in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamika. Matt, how can you help further realize these democratic values as a member of the Commonwealth Court?
Sure. So I can definitely further democratic values by virtue of what I'm not. My opponent is a strict constructionist, self-proclaimed. And that is something required in Republican circles to get the Donald Trump stamp of approval for judicial candidates, as we've seen with what happened with our Supreme Court. That leads to undemocratic results. So that is not me. My entire life as an adult has been dedicated to civil rights, equity, and inclusion, access to justice. 25 years of practicing as a civil rights trial attorney, representing people against management and the government, suing for excessive use of force, suing for racial profiling, suing for discrimination in the workplace. I've filed all of those cases and either tried or settled them. I'm proud of my work as a civil rights trial attorney. As a judge and a supervising judge, without tipping the scales in any single case, I've had the opportunity to effectuate access to justice and equity. I've been working with for 2.5 years with the National Center for State Courts under a Pew Charitable Trust grant, and we have completely remodeled the civil division of the Philadelphia Municipal Court to make it easier for people to come to court, to lower default rates, to lower judgment rates, to make the landlord-tenant court more accessible, all the while in communication with adverse parties. So creditor attorneys, landlord attorneys. I've never done anything to tip the scales. I've worked with them. So my professional life has been dedicated to equity, access to justice, and civil rights. And that's what you would get if you elected me.
Let's call on Judge Dan McCaffrey now. You are a big hitter. Let's give you a chance to take a cut at this.
Can you hear me, Murray?
Absolutely. You're looking good and we hear you well.
Well, Murray, let me just start off by kind of echoing what Matt said. My mother used to have a saying, which is if you want to know what someone's going to do in the future, take a look at what they've been with their lives. If you recall back in the primary of this year when I was running from the primary, the Philadelphia Inquirer was literally one of about 2 or 3 newspapers that refused to endorse my candidacy for Supreme Court. And the reason they actually refused to support my candidacy was because I am, as they put it, too closely aligned with the Pennsylvania Democratic Party and news. They said it in the context of the fact that they thought I was a politician. Yet I've been a judge for 10 years. I have literally made decisions on thousands and thousands and thousands of cases. Yet they couldn't point to one instance where I disregarded my oath of office or I disregarded the law and I engaged in partisan politics from the bench. When you want to know what someone's going to do in the future, look at what they've done in the past. This is a very easy question for me. It's a very easy room for me to kind of put it into because I literally have pictures of me as a 4-year-old child walking a picket line with my mother and father, 2 union organizers. I was born and I was raised in the Democratic Party to respect democratic values. I've been unapologetic about those values. I've been unapologetic about what I've done my entire career, which has been helping to elect pro-democracy, pro-labor, and pro-choice Democrats up and down the ballot. That's who I am. That's what I've done my entire career. In 1997, when I joined Friedman Truman in Elkins Park, the Republican Party ruled Montgomery County. They ruled Montgomery County because of the fact that they were basically well-funded by my opponent and my opponent's family. They've made no bones about it. They made her the public defender of Montgomery County. They made her the county solicitor of Montgomery County, and then they made her a judge. Every single one of our opponents, from the Supreme Court to the Superior Court candidates to the Commonwealth Court candidates, have been unapologetic about who they are and what their positions are. They've all run as pro-life candidates. They've said it, and they've demanded adherence to pro-life decisions. They've also run as pro-gun candidates, and they've run as pro-law and order candidates. And each and every one of them has described themselves as a follower, as an acolyte of Justice Scalia, and as an originalist. We know what originalism means, as Matt just mentioned. We know what originalism is going to mean on our Supreme Court. It's going to mean women's reproductive rights are no longer respected. Labor rights are ignored and scaled back on. And civil rights and criminal justice reforms are going to be halted exponentially and then rolled back to where they were in 1789 when our Constitution was first adopted. We cannot allow those gains to be stripped away. Each and every one of us is running for the same and under the same principles to protect and defend those advances, to protect and defend your constitutional rights. And that includes women's reproductive rights. It includes gerrymandering and voting rights. It includes all of those rights that we Democrats have fought for the last 60 years. And I'm unapologetic about it. We elect judges in Pennsylvania. The voters have a right to know what we are and what we stand for.
Thank you, Dan. I think it's not too far-fetched to say that the upcoming election is one in which democracy itself and the rule of law will be on the ballot. And each of these rights that the candidates have talked about are part and parcel of the rule of law and democracy, which everyone in this forum and everyone participating has taken for granted for most of your life. And yet now we find them under attack. I'd like to ask each of the candidates to tell us a bit about how, if they, when they are sitting on their bench, the new Superior, Supreme, and Commonwealth Court, how can they help to save democracy and the rule of law? Let's start with Tamika.
Thank you so much. I think the Superior Court, that's a great question for Jill and I, because that's where most cases are going to stop, as you know, the Superior Court. The Superior Court is an error correcting court. They review a cold transcript from the trial court, currently like where I sit, the Court of Common Pleas. And from there, the judges, the panel will make a decision on how to rule. So I think it's imperative that you have judges there who are knowledgeable of the law, who have practiced the law extensively, and who really care about the humanity and people. That's the rule of law. That is democracy, to make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity to be heard in court. It is a democratic value to make sure that no matter who you are, where you're from, who you love, what religion you practice, what language you speak, how much money you have, none of it matters. We all deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and equal under the law. And it matters. And you need judges who will make sure that that is applied, because the Superior Court rulings obviously apply to all of Pennsylvania. We can control what happens in our individual courtrooms, but I can't control what my colleague does. But with the Superior Court, those opinions are statewide and they really matter.
Thank you, Tamika. Matt?
Thank you.
Sure. So I want to hold the line. The United States Supreme Court has gone back in time. They've rolled back rights. They've rolled back reproductive rights. They've rolled back equity rights. We're in 1970, according to the United States Supreme Court. The Pennsylvania Constitution has its own privacy rights, has its own reproductive rights, has its own gun regulation rights. I want to hold the line. Since most of the cases that come before the Commonwealth Court are going to deal with the Pennsylvania Constitution, I can't say how I'm going to rule on those cases, but I want to hold the line on the rights that we have, preserve the rights of all Pennsylvanians going forward. If I'm elected, I get a 10-year term. If I'm retained, that's another 10. That's 20 years that I'd like to see us go into the future. I don't want to see us go into the past like the United States Supreme Court has done. I want to preserve the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and protect the rights that we have to the fullest extent that's allowed under the law. So that's what I would do.
Thank you, Matt. Judge McCaffrey, how can your service on the Supreme Court help to protect democracy and the rule of law in the Commonwealth?
Well, Murray, very simply put, by upholding the law. I mean, this is going to sound a little bit cliche, but what Matt just talked about there is exactly what we've been talking about from day one. Our opponents keep saying, they campaigned in the primary as pro-life candidates. They campaigned in the primary as pro-gun candidates. They've campaigned in the primary as wanting to take a look at another look or redraw Act 77 and voting rights. When we talk about upholding the law, we're actually talking about upholding our oath of office. You see, our oath of office demands that we follow the law as it exists. If you recall, and I've said this in my campaign speech from day one, Donald Trump had 3 appointees to the United States Supreme Court. Every single one of them, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, were grilled by the Senate Judiciary Committee on their credentials, and they were all wonderfully credentialed individuals. but they were all asked about their judicial philosophy, and they were asked specifically about upholding those advances in the law. They were asked specifically about Roe versus Wade. They were asked about same-sex marriages. They were asked about all of these issues, and every single one of them answered the question the same exact way, which is that we will uphold and defend the law, and that is the law. And it was the law right up until a majority of the United States Supreme Court said it was no longer the law. That's what we keep talking about when we say majorities matter. Our opponents keep saying they're going to uphold the law. They're giving the same answers that those 3 justices gave. But people need to understand that it's not simply a matter of you saying something. It's a matter of you doing something. It's a matter of you basically getting to the Supreme Court and saying, you know what? I am going to uphold the law. I'm going to uphold the existing law as it is. In Pennsylvania, under the Abortion Control Act, women have a right to an abortion up to 24 weeks. That is the law of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If it is removed for whatever reason by a Republican legislature, we may run into a situation where we have to decide that under constitutional grounds. I think everybody has a right to answer that question and know who they're electing to the courts.
Murray, may I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
This is Roger. Dan, I want to go on record as violently objecting some of the flyers that
I think that was
sorry.
an unintended interruption. And Jill, have you had a chance to answer this?
I haven't yet, Murray. Thank you.
So tell us, if you will, how your service on the Superior Court is going to help to protect democracy and the rule of law. And I have to say that the 3 answers thus far have been spectacular, and I know yours will be as well. Sorry for that interruption.
No problem. I couldn't agree more. Listen, our Superior Court, as I said, is the court of last resort for 98% of cases that come before it. So we need someone who is going to review the facts, make sure that the facts as found by the trial court are supported by the record, and apply the law as written. As I say, it's not brain surgery, but it's an incredibly important role. And it's an incredibly important role in upholding the law and applying the rule of law. The law should not be a surprise to anyone. You should not act and then later be surprised to learn that this is something that you legally were not permitted to do or somehow violated the law. The law should be predictable and consistent. I think applying precedent, as Dan was suggesting, is incredibly important. Knowing what the law said in the past and applying it again in the future, that is the basis of our system. And our appellate courts stand not only as a check and balance, as a third co-equal branch of government on the legislative and executive branches of government, but also on the lower courts. We are a check and balance to make sure that the cases are decided legally, correctly, and that the law is applied equally and fairly to everyone. And that is what I pledge to do.
Thank you, Jill. Hopefully we have time for one more question, and not that the others haven't been fun, but hopefully this will be more fun for you. What would you like to have been asked that your host and moderator wasn't smart enough to ask you, and which you really would like everyone tuning in to hear the answer to? Let's start with you, Dan. You are muted right now.
Sorry, that keep unmuting and the little screen comes up saying mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. Murray, I guess the only thing I would kind of say I would have enjoyed someone kind of, I don't necessarily know about asking the question is the right way, but acknowledging, and I've said this a couple of times on the campaign trail. I would just want to acknowledge how difficult this process has been. People don't realize because, we show up on a Zoom call or we show up at a function and we're there for a half an hour and then we're on to another function. But the last 12 months has been nothing short of 12-hour days, 7 days a week. And it's meaningful because we understand as attorneys and we understand as judges how important these particular decisions are. I kind of alluded to the fact at the outset, I've been involved in Democratic politics my entire life. I've worked to elect Democratic candidates up and down the aisle. And, a friend of mine was joking around with me not too long ago. It's like if for the first half of your career, you showed up with a check and now you're showing up for a check, which was kind of a funny way to put how my career has gone. But, I just want to kind of commend personally and outwardly and publicly what Jill, Matt, and Tamika have done along with me in this campaign, because we've been out there 12-hour days and we've been out there for a month. It's taken a lot of time and effort to do this, and it's taken a lot of time away from our families and our loved ones. But we're doing it because we believe in what we say. We're doing this because we believe in protecting democracy and protecting the rights we keep talking about, so people can understand literally what is at stake. Because the United States Supreme Court, if nothing else, they have really crystallized in Americans' minds how important electing judges and judges who share your values to these courts that will either protect those rights or will scale those rights back and let them be trampled on by a majority, or in some cases, a minority government. And I think that people need to understand how difficult this campaign is. And I think people need to kind of get energized about spreading the word about why the majorities in our court matter and what's really at stake. Because as Jill will tell people, Josh Shapiro got elected governor with $60 million raised. And the fact of the matter is no governor, no senator, no county commissioner can take away your rights with the stroke of a pen, but judges can. And that's why it's critically important that we focus on these judicial elections. And we're trying to run in the same state that Josh Shapiro ran for governor with literally 1/100th of the resources. And we're doing it for Pennsylvanians.
Well, Dan, if that's a motion, allow me please to second it. And that's what we're all here for tonight. We are going to do everything we can to make sure that come November 7th, all of your hard work and these long hours pays off, not only for you, but for the people of Pennsylvania who are going to be the beneficiaries of the kind of appellate judges the four of you will be. Jill, could you ask yourself a question that you would like to be asked and give us an answer?
Yeah, listen, I will just, I don't know if it's so much of a question, but I think that the information is important. Our judicial system is confusing. Dan and Matt and Tamika and we've tried to, lay this out for you. Neil gave a great explanation. But I think what people really need to understand is just how important these roles are. As Dan said, we are the only branch of government that can just strip you of your rights with a stroke of a pen or enforce your rights with the stroke of a pen. And that is a really powerful responsibility. These cases affect every Pennsylvanian, whether you are the litigants in the case or not. Superior court cases too, because even when we're deciding someone else's right to freedom or someone else's right to stay in their home or someone else's right to parent their children, you will be affected by these cases. We are interpreting our laws. We are interpreting our Constitution. And so something that did not adversely affect you yesterday very well could adversely affect you tomorrow. I have been campaigning around the state. I've been in all 67 counties, most of them more than once, trying to impart this upon people and the importance of these elections. People, it's hard to get people energized about judicial elections. I think the freighter ship is slowly turning, but if you're talking to your friends, to your neighbors, to your colleagues, please tell them the importance of voting. Mail-in ballots, coming the day of on November 7th, whatever it may be. This is a turnout election. It is going to matter how many people walk into that voting booth. And at the end of the day, odd year elections typically get about 30% turnout. We can do better than that. Montgomery County, I'm counting on you. We can do better than this. We can get more people. Let's make it 40%. Heck, let's make it 50% from Montgomery County. Really show Pennsylvania what you're made of. And you can help elect 4 highly qualified jurists to our appellate benches. Thank you.
No, I hear 60%. All right. Thank you. I understand that Tim Briggs is going to join us briefly before I call on Tamika and Matt.
So, Murray, thank you for letting me jump in, and I have to go pick up my girls from an activity. But I just wanted to echo what Jill and Dan said. These are not sexy elections, but they are more important than any election we could expect to cast a ballot for. We have to do the hard work in these final few weeks to make sure all the hard work that McCaffrey and Wolf and Lane and Beck have done leading up to this point. They are great candidates, And the way we can do it is we have to vote for all four of them. We have to vote for both Lane and Beck. We have to vote for Wolf, and we have to vote for McCaffrey. It wasn't, 2017, 2021, we lost these races. We lost the two most recent Supreme Court races. We can't lose these elections. It is just too much on the line, too critical. And with that, we know how to win elections. So we are going to, Sarah is having canvases every weekend planned. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that we get that number as high as possible. And thank you for putting yourself out there as being candidates. You are great public servants, and you're going to all be great higher up level judges and justices. Thank you so much, Murray.
Thank you, Tim. We'll let you go pick up your daughter, and let's bring on Tamika and ask if she would ask herself a question that she wished she had been asked and give us one of her very good answers. Tamika?
Hi, I just want to say thank you, because so many times we feel like we're just like alone out here, like trying to make sure that we're crisscrossing rural areas, suburban areas, urban areas. We're everywhere trying to talk about this race. And sometimes we feel like, oh my gosh, like we're exhausted doing it. My law clerks think I'm crazy because I'm sending opinions at 4 o'clock in the morning because I'm still on the bench during the day and trying to get my opinions and motions and everything done after all the campaign stuff. And that is all of us. We are giving it 1000%. So to be on here, to see this great turnout, and every time we're around you, to feel that energy, to feel that support, it really re-energizes us, because we need it. When the Republicans dropped $9 million in their state judicial PAC, it was kind of deflating. But then we're like, you know what? They don't have what we have. And that is each and every one of you working our butts off, making sure that we ensure that everyone's voice is heard and that democracy is saved here in Pennsylvania, and that everyone can be their authentic self. So we just want to just say thank you from the four of us, from the bottom of our hearts. You guys matter more than you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamika. Matt, what would you like the voters to know about you that we haven't touched upon?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say that my white German Shepherd is vying for my attention as I was preparing to come on just now. So if you hear any whining, she wants to go out, and I'm glad we're towards the end, because she's going to get
Is she registered?
She is not registered. So civility, what's important to me is the question, and civility is the answer. Civility in the courtroom is very important, because it allows everybody to represent themselves or represent their client without intimidation, without being nervous, to the best of their ability. Civility in this race is really important. We have been issue oriented as a ticket. We address the facts and the issues that the voters are going to be facing. But we're up against a billionaire who is influencing these races. I'm prepared for this race to go negative, but I will always stay positive. If it does turn negative, even if it doesn't, we have all been very positive, and I'm proud of my ticket mates. I'm proud to be with them. We're running a very civil and honest and appropriate race. And I think that at the end of the day, that's what people want to see. And I hope that our issues prevail, and that on November 8th, we are the winning ticket.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to ask each of the candidates to offer us a 90-second or so closing statement. And we'll start with our Supreme Court nominee, Dan McCaffrey.
Good, Murray, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're coming in loud and clear.
Thanks, Murray. I guess I'm just going to close by kind of going where I started from. Tamika just alluded to $11 million in a judicial PAC that was kind of dumped on the Republicans by the Republican Party. Campaign finance reports were due literally this week, and the campaign finance reports that were submitted by my opponent reflected that she was given literally $2 million from the Commonwealth Leaders Fund. Early on, Murray, I think someone mentioned the flyers that are being sent out negatively about me, trying to tie me to a scandal that was 10 years ago. involving my brother while he was on this Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I understand negativity in campaigns, but as Matt said, we've tried to run a very positive, qualifications and issues-oriented campaign. But, I'm a big boy and I've been involved in Democratic politics for quite some time. So I know that the Republican message is always going to be one of negativity, and it's always going to be one of kind of misdirection because they don't want to focus on the issues. The issues that we've been running on across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are those that we've talked about tonight. We are out here right now to protect and defend the rights that are being scaled back by the United States Supreme Court, and we're doing so in accordance with Pennsylvania law. So when we talk about upholding and defending the law, the rule of law, the Constitution, we're not just talking about a piece of paper. We're talking about the rights that are enshrined therein. These are rights that liberal democracies and the Democratic Party have fought for 60 years. Women's reproductive health, privacy rights, LGBTQ rights, labor rights, civil rights, criminal justice reform, in a time where it is sorely needed. These are all advances that we have made as a party and as a country for the last 60 years, but we now have a strain on our government that is trying to take us back to, as Matt said, the 1970s. We're out here fighting every single day to protect and defend those rights. We will continue to do so. I will remain unfailingly positive because I believe that come January, we're going to have 4 new judges on Pennsylvania's appellate courts, and it's going to be Justice McCaffrey, Judge Wolf, Judge Beck, and Judge Tamika Lane. And we're only going to get there with your love, your support, your prayers, and most importantly, your vote and your effort. So get out there and tell your family and tell your friends. And thank you for doing what you do.
You have all of the above. Thank you, Dan. Drive carefully. Jill, will you come on and give us your final thoughts here in the closing statement?
Yes, thank you, Murray. As Dan mentioned before, we are running statewide. We are running in the same geographic area as Josh Shapiro, as Bob Casey, as John Fetterman, and doing it on 1/100th of their budget. That means that we cannot have individual staff from all of our campaigns in every municipality or even every county. We can't even have them in every region. We need your help. You all play such an outsized role in what we do, and we are so, so grateful. So when you are making phone calls and text banking and you're out knocking doors, carrying our lit, you are doing us an enormous favor by being out there, by saying our names, by letting voters know that they need to support the candidates that you are supporting. That is an enormous help for us. Telling your friends, telling your family, telling your colleagues, heck, telling your enemies, talking to everybody about these elections and getting them out to vote. That is what we need, and that is what will get us across the finish line. So thank you for everything that you've done and continue to do to help this slate.
Before I call on Tamika and Matt, I want to remind all of those who are with us tonight to go on the chat box, on the chat function, and there you will find a way to contribute to each of these hardworking candidates. I think it's amazing that our candidates are coming to us in the evening, that almost all driving around from one place to another. Let's be sure to support them. And that means some financial support as well. Thank you. Tamika, let's have your closing statement, please.
Again, I just want to echo what has been said. We cannot do it without each and every one of you, and we appreciate you. One thing that really haunts me is that I have a daughter, and I'm just so scared that my mother and I would have had more rights than my daughter. All these rights that, we and our foremothers and fathers have fought for, that people took for granted, we know that we can, and they are all at play again, thanks to Donald Trump's Supreme Court. And then they sent those issues back to Pennsylvania. So I know each and every one of you on here are just as disturbed and really want to protect democracy and make sure that our rights are protected and our voices are heard and people can live their authentic life without harassment, without discrimination. And we will do this together because we are in it together. It's not about me. It's not about Dan, Jill, or Matt. It is about each and every one of you, our children, our future, and what we want Pennsylvania to be. So just thank you so much.
It bears repeating before I call on Matt Wolf to make his final statement, that if you will go on the chat function, you'll find a way to contribute to these really spectacular candidates who so deserve our support. Matt Wolf, please give us your closing statement.
Sure. I think that what Donald Trump did was seek to exploit the divide, non-existent divide until he did it, between rural and urban people throughout the country. And that's wrong. That's divisive. And I am sure that all of the Democratic candidates for the statewide offices, judicial offices, are seeking to represent all of the Pennsylvanians, not just urban, not just rural, not just suburban, not one or the other, but all of them. And that is about unity. That's about fairness. It's about the rule of law. And I think that if we're successful, all of Pennsylvania is going to be proud of this ticket when we're elected. But we can only do it with Montgomery County's help, because Montgomery County is super important in this election. This election is going to be determined by turnout. Montgomery County always has great turnout. And so we are counting on you. We are counting on you all to help us get elected so that we can carry our values onto the court. I appreciate you having us here. It's been wonderful being here. Appreciate the opportunity to speak about these issues. And I always enjoy hearing my fellow candidates and your other guests talk about these issues. So thank you.
As the host of this forum, I have the honor of thanking so many people who made it possible. And invariably, I'm not going to be able to name everybody, but let me start by thanking Neil, who gave us a little bit of a lesson. He's modest and wouldn't accept the title of constitutional professor, but he gave us a very good lecture to help us understand the structure of these all-important courts that we are talking about and that we have to win to protect the rule of law. And then Tim Briggs, our Judiciary Committee head from the state legislature, thank you. And I guess most of all, we want to thank the 4 names that I said at the outset that you've got to take away with you and talk with your friends about, and let's bring them home. And that's Dan McCaffrey, Tamika Lane, Jill Beck, and Matt Wolf. A lot of other people behind the scenes, Jeff Scott, who runs the Lower Murray and Narberth group, Adrian Seltzer, who runs the Issues and Policies group that's responsible, Sarah Atkins, who's running a lot of the technical features for us tonight, and on and on. I believe that we also have, and I have the honor of introducing a friend. She happens also to be one of our 3 area vice presidents, and she has some suggestions and some points. She's looking good. I see her right there. Nancy Kleinberg. Go for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Murray, for being such an effective and congenial and really wonderful host. And I want to thank the candidates so much for being here. First of all, you just do so much work, and I kind of want to turn around what Jill Beck said. You thanked us for doing you a favor. Well, I feel like we do about 1,000th of what you're doing. So you're doing us an honor and a favor. I'm so glad you came to this forum conversation, because it helps us get energized when we meet you personally and we see how amazing you are. It energizes us. And you can all, every one of you on this call, I'm a little bit preaching to the choir, but I am begging you to give it your all, do more than you've been doing. I can't tell you, democracy rests on your shoulders. I mean that. Monco and Delco are the key to having Pennsylvania have a democratic court. It will be even more challenging in 2025 with more seats up. We have to do it this year. We cannot embolden the Republicans. And I am begging you, go on the chat and sign up to volunteer, whether you have a half hour or many hours. We will find something for you to do. We need you to text. We need you to canvass. There's going to be a big canvass in Monco led by Giselle Fetterman. We need you to work at the polls. We desperately need you. Guys, if not now, when? I've been saying this for 7 years, but it's more true than ever. Thank you all so much for being there. Please don't go off until you sign that volunteer link. Thank you so much. And
So
I
I
guess, I'm sorry.
I'm just going to say good night and good luck. And thank you so much for being with us. And I see a wonderful group of Democrats there, and we're going to go out and do everything we can to bring home this ticket. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Don't turn off the Zoom
Good
right
night.
until people have a chance to click that link.
Also, don't forget to either apply for your mail-in ballot or make a plan to vote on November 7th. You can also check your voter registration status. I'm throwing that in the chat right now. Hi, Adrian Seltzer here, Chair of the Issues and Policy Committee that did an absolutely wonderful job bringing this to you tonight. I am going to, though, turn off the recording.